Welcome to the Dreams of Consciousness podcast. If you'd be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself?
Oh, sure. Now I got to carry the whole load, right? Tom Hazelmyer from
And
Amphetamine Records and a bunch of other crap.
and Tom, would you say that Amphetamine Reptile Records specializes in a particular genre of music, or maybe a particular area of music?
Yeah, loud, aggressive. I don't know if it's a specific. People try to think of it as a genre. I guess I try to resistant to that. Maybe I'm full of shit, but loud and aggressive, to my thinking, has always covered a large swath. Like I've said for years and years, from the birthday party to Slayer and many thousands of points in between. My personal tastes run that way, so never had a formula. Like, we're looking for this specific formula in a sound before we would work with somebody or not. The only consistent thing for the most part, and even that's 100% consistent, was the abrasiveness, aggressiveness, loudness to the music.
And a few of the bands who've been released on AMREP over the years have been on this podcast. I spoke with Chris from Unsane a few years ago. I spoke with Steve Austin from Today's the Day. The guys in the band Hammerhead have another band called Vaz, who played Malaysia back in 2012. And I wrote
I
about
think
that.
it's pronounced Vaz.
Vaz? Okay.
I don't know. Vaz. Tomato.
But so AMREP should be familiar to people who listen to this podcast and people who visit the website. I think from the outside, the genre that these bands are largely associated with is noise rock. I don't know how you feel about that term, and I don't know how you feel about. You don't feel strongly one way or another.
It's not really I get upset by being categorized, because I've categorized myself on a certain lot of levels. But I never had any problems with the term noise rock. I think it's kind of funny. It just kind of became a default from putting together a logo. Just like, we need something behind this other shape to kind of balance it out and kind of square it up a little bit. Let's put a word there. I don't know what word. Noise, that's apropos. That'll work. And 35, 40 years later, here we are.
I mean, do you feel it's an appropriate way to describe the bands that you release?
Sure, why not? Noisy, obnoxious, sure. I would have put obnoxious, but we couldn't fit it in that small of a space.
Nox rock, would that work?
Sure. Pig fuck, assholes, pain in the ass, all sorts of stuff.
So you originally formed AMREP to release your own band, Halo of Flies. At what point did you decide that you wanted to get involved with other people's music, releasing their music as well?
It was never a conscientious decision. It was more or less friends in bands doing stuff coming to me after I was doing it myself and saying, "Hey, do my band." And just kind of like, well, sure, why not? And it just kind of, the trickle turned into a flow after a while of, like, it started off with literally, I think the first thing was Steve Turner and Mark Arm from that would have become Mudhoney, but at the time they were in Green River and they were doing a side project called the Thrown Ups, which they loved, and they hit me up with that. That was like the first thing, and so there was no intention to be a serious label, but it just kind of evolved. The next band to hit me up was the U-Men, whom I would never say no to, because I love those guys, loved everything they did. And then then many boulders were rolling down the hill.
Sure. And at a certain point, Halo Flies stopped recording and releasing music, but you've kept the label going since then. Um, what made you decide to focus more on releasing other people's music and less on creating your own?
It was more fun for me. I actually enjoyed it more. Um, I was never big on uh, playing live. Like we did really well doing like live shows, but I never actually enjoyed it. It was too nerve wracking. I just was like, uh, for lack of a better term, like stage fright. But I wasn't scared to be up there. It wasn't like there was some sort of terror. It was just more like too much stress wrapped up around it. Band rehearsals, the inner conflicts inside of a band, all that shit I did not enjoy. What I did enjoy was pulling together the art for release, the plotting of that type of stuff, working with other bands. I really enjoyed that. So my focus just kind of shifted over to that and away from doing my own band. I kind of kept one couple toes in the music pond, as it were, over the years, doing odds and ends here and there, but nothing ever hardcore serious again as far as full-time effort on my part to be on the stage versus behind it.
I'd like to backtrack a little bit. I'm curious if there was a band or an album or maybe a, a show, a gig that made you decide that you wanted to be part of this music, you wanted to be involved in creating it or releasing it?
I'm a horrible fucking person at specifics. I've never gone through my life with being able to write. It was that moment. I'm just not that guy. It was always music always consumed me, and then the whole punk rock, underground thing. Because when I got into it, I was fucking obsessed from 77 on with punk rock and all that entailed. That using the broad umbrella punk rock, that post punk and blah blah blah. 1,000 genres that shot out of that.
Sure.
Um, but I was always obsessed with it in general, and always wanted to do it. It was just like um, I don't know, just breathing. You're consuming these records, and they just mean the entire world to you. The graphics and the whole experience, going to shows, whether it was bigger bands from elsewhere or the early Minneapolis hardcore scene, basement shows and garage shows. Uh, it was always, I don't know, it just felt like it was always there. It wasn't, there wasn't a moment where I was just trundling along, la di da, and then got hit by a rock and went ta da. Yeah, not how it worked.
Yeah. And early on, what did creating a record label entail? Was it just going to a pressing plant and getting some vinyl printed? Did you have to create an LLC or anything like that?
No, it was literally done out of a barracks up in Washington at that point. Um, no, it was like going to the library and pulling phone books and looking through random phone books until I found a pressing plant. And I believe the first one was in St. Louis. I mean, back then, every region had its own small pressing plant generally. But I found one in St. Louis, found out that other people were using it as well. But yeah, it's getting into you're going to get into I walked 20 miles uphill with no shoes to get to school stories of early record label where literally starting it and figuring out every fucking aspect on my own by myself, because there wasn't an internet where you could go to YouTube and like, I'm going to watch 5 how to start your own record label videos and
Right.
get a pretty good idea of how this is going. It's like you're on your fucking own. Like even doing graphics, where it's like one of the times was the first time I did 2 colors, because I was every color, every 7-inch sleeve I was running through. I'd have to find a copier that could do 11 by 17 paper. And like I said, we're talking some Stone Age shit where it's like I had to drive an hour and a half down to Seattle to find the paper stock I needed, because you just couldn't get paper anywhere. You couldn't order online. Go to this paper warehouse. The guy's like, "Yeah, kid, it's down there, down this dark hallway." You know what I mean? Just like, it's an insane level of just to find 11 by 17 paper, so I could then find 11 by 17 copier and run my black and white image and make, sleeves that I would have to hand cut down to size. And on the first one, like figuring out how to do color separations, completely ass backwards with no, well, let me see if I line it up and I'm holding paper up to the light and hoping it works out. And the printer's like, "This is never going to work. I'll do it anyhow." And he does it. And he goes, "I can't believe this fucking worked." But that was the local print shop in Whidbey Island, Washington. Using them because I wanted to do two colors. I was stepping it up. It was like the fourth or fifth single. It's like, "We're going to color, boy. It's color. It's here." So it was the learning curve, like the LLC or figuring out business aspects of it. Fuck, that didn't happen for a while. It was literally out of my personal savings account, where the checks would get deposited, and what little bills there were would get paid, and the bands get paid out of that. But no, it was no step by step figuring it out as I went. So, I mean, at least I didn't do I saw a Discord interview the past few years where they were talking about when they were doing a single sleeve. They were in the same boat. They didn't know what the fuck to do. There was no one that was going to help you, or unless you could afford to get sleeves done at the factory, and no one could afford that. Where they took an English punk rock 7-inch and kind of pulled it apart, and then copied the lines, and then hand glued and folded every single sleeve to match, which is pretty fucking ridiculous, but that's the type of shit you did to figure stuff out, like pull a magazine apart. How does this work? How's this put together? Oh, you get the staple here. Got it. And then you're rigging from scratch on doing a lot of that stuff.
And so for the first few years, you're operating out of the barracks while you were in the Marines?
Yeah.
Did you get any kind of guff or pushback about doing this while you were enlisted?
I got pushback and guff about everything all the time. I was, yeah. I mean, I didn't do myself any favors in the Marine Corps. I would, did shit like found a really fucking awesome 1960 pink Cadillac as a used car. And that doesn't seem like a big deal, but when you're driving around a bunch of Marines in a pink car, the pink interior, they're like, "What the fuck?" And I'm like, "It's fucking cool. Look at that." There was definitely aesthetic clashes, all sorts of clashes. The mere fact of getting called a faggot, okay, I don't care, was enough to get you in trouble.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, kind of used to that from being a kid in South Minneapolis and being into punk rock, where it's like, the bottles were flying because you were a fucking mutant weirdo. It's like nothing changed. It was just a different group of intolerant people who didn't like you being a fucking weirdo.
At what point were you able to? At what point did you move AMREP into its own space?
Basically getting out of the service, moved back to Minneapolis, and talk about Stone Age times. It was like we were able to get an apartment with an extra bedroom. So that became the de facto office for the first year or two of being out of the barracks, as it were.
Gotcha.
And then shortly after that, got offered to team up with Twin Tone Records. They did Replacements and Soul Asylum and a bunch of other Minneapolis bands, and they offered up like space in their offices. That's when it became like a full-time thing. I wasn't a janitor or a security guard anymore. It was like actually spending my days making and talking records.
And at that point, was AmRep breaking even? Were you guys able to generate enough income to run the label full time?
Um, it was pretty much through the help of Twin Tone, where they kind of got me a P&D deal for manufacturing, like and cut me loose to be able to allow a lot of these bands that I was working with, doing singles with, like the God Bullies and Tar, Thrown Ups, like we said, just very stuff I was already doing singles with and involved with, like through the Dope Guns um series. Like they opened it up and gave me access to their distribution, so and bankrolled me being able to do full LPs with these bands. And yeah, it was big, it's big enough for to have me going full time and cover my ass. The way that worked out, I don't know if it necessarily would have, had I been, like I said, just kind of trundling along, figuring it out, pooling together the money to do an LP, which is, still hideously expensive. And just getting access to like their distribution network was invaluable. Totally gave me a leg up and able to take a big leap forward.
In terms of when you first started the label and were figuring it out as you went along, what was one thing or
I'm
maybe a
sorry,
couple
what was
things
that?
you sorry, in terms of the beginning of the label, when you first started the label, is there anything you wish you
Mm-hmm.
knew at the very beginning or advice that you would have given to someone else who was starting a label at the time?
um Man, I am not I don't spend a lot of time thinking about what could have been, what should have been, what would have been nice if it changed. So I'm just not geared to think in those terms. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, because I enjoyed the shit out of the way it all went. So I don't really think back and go, man, that one night you should have had 20 less beers. There's a couple of those, sure, but uh yeah, I don't know. Oh, sure, sign Nirvana.
Was that
Yeah,
an
go
option at
back.
the time?
Hey, dummy. Hey, sign those guys.
Was that an option at the time?
No,
Okay.
no, they were in our circles. I mean, I was in Minneapolis, and Sub Pop jumped on that pretty quick.
Yeah.
So, by the first time I was hearing about them, they were already on Sub Pop, and I think they'd already done that first single, the Love Buzz one. I'd heard that at a party out in Seattle, actually.
I mean, you didn't sign Nirvana, but you did sign a number of bands that got very big very quickly, like Helmet, Unsane. Uh, you know, I don't know how big Today is the Day is, but like in my circle, like they became a very influential band. Um, can you tell me a little bit about what drew you to these bands? Why you wanted them to be associated with AMRAP?
Well, like I mentioned before, where it's like I never thought of it as a particular genre. One of the things was, especially back then in my younger days, was I was always looking for a new kick. I didn't want to hear, once I'd heard Helmet, I didn't want to hear Helmet again. And there's a whole slew of new metal bands that approached us wanting us to work with them that became huge that I wanted nothing to do with, because it was like, Helmet, been there, done that. Melvin's been there, done that. It was kind of always my attitude to a certain extent. Um, so I was kind of looking for something new. So when the first time hearing Today is a Day, that was a new twist on shit. That was a different angle that I don't think had been covered. Kind of prog noise. You know what I mean? The way the structure of their songs and stuff, or um, so that was, with different bands. That's kind of a certain element of what I was looking for, I guess. Was it tickled my fancy in a way that uh, was new or different to me, fresh.
Yeah. It sounds like you personally sign bands that you like. Like you sign bands that you personally like.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I run across people, and some people that are fucking hideously successful in the music business that can have a disconnect where they're able to say that's going somewhere, and they don't give a fuck about it. They're not um coming at music from the way I am, which is like I live and breathe it, and it's like it was my thing. So I was approaching it as far as label goes the wrong fucking way. Your taste shouldn't, you know what I mean? You should be a little bit more mercenary about it. You know, will this sell? Will the kids like it? You know, that kind of shit, which is just was never our shtick by any stretch. And you know, we weren't alone in that. By that, you know, all the labels that I admired before I got really cranking, like Homestead or Discord or Touch and Go, they were all doing that, just that. You know, it was all a matter of like, you know, what do we love? All these guys are fucking amazing. I want to work with these guys, you know, that kind of thing. So it's not like I, you know, invented the wheel that way by any stretch of the imagination. But like I said, there's the opposite thing where I've come across it where it's just like, you know, some guy who might personally uh, uh, listen to nothing but 60s bubblegum signing, you know, really fucked up dark metal shit, but he knows that's going to work. You know, that type of, he said, I
Right.
kind of, I view it as mercenary. It's just business,
Yeah.
but there's 100 ways to skin the cat, as they say. I suppose it's in politics to say that anymore, but back in the cat skinning days, you used to say that.
I, I'm curious how these bands got in touch with you. Did they all send demo tapes? Did you see some
It
of them
was
live when
it
they?
was it was all over the place. It was from some bands were straight up through demo tapes. Other bands would be, you know, several bands came to me via the Cows, because the Cows were always touring, always working, always touring, and they'd come back and say, "We just saw these fucking wackadoos in Pittsburgh or, you know, Santa Monica, that you got to check this out," that type of thing. So stuff would come that way, or stumbling across stuff, you know, band playing, you know, band touring and playing in Minneapolis on a bill, and you're like, what the hell was that? That was really good. So it was a whole myriad of different. There was no formula on that by far. There was nothing, you know.
Yeah.
There was trusted people that would come to you. You know, Peter Davis from Your Flesh magazine was definitely hit me to, you know, stuff like I said, the Cows, just being at the clubs, being at shows and that kind of thing. Word of mouth, you'd start hearing about a band somewhere and you go check them out. So there was lots of different ways.
Sure. Uh, I'm curious about the economics of running the label at the time. Were the more successful bands basically bankrolling some of the more experimental or more underground bands?
Well, I mean, in general, bigger bands are always underwriting you doing new stuff. Not directly, they still get paid their royalties, but obviously having two or three bands that can sell some records makes the cash pool big enough for you to sign new bands and keep, you know, it's a little cycle, you know. And we tried to kind of mechanize that. Like when we brought a band into the label, we would, you know, one of the more established bands in Friends, like Helmet or Melvins or Cows, we'd try to get them to take the new bands out with them. And as those bands got, you know, big enough to have enough weight to take a new baby band on, you know, so we tried to make stuff like that part of the system, like how, you know, uh, words go out of head, leave me. Uh, yeah, just like, you know, it was a cycle of, and there was like a real intense camaraderie between a lot of the MREP bands, as when it came to touring and getting together and working together. on records and stuff like that. So, um, I trailed off into nothing.
There seemed to be a point in the mid '90s where the major labels were scrambling to sign anything associated with like AmRep, Sub Pop, Alternative Tentacles, SST. Um, were
Yeah,
you
we
afraid
call
of
that
losing?
they call that was the they didn't know whether to shit or go blind period for major labels.
Yeah,
I personally thought that shit was fucking hilarious because they had done everything in their power to suppress punk rock, to bury it. They didn't want anything to do with it. They tried it once in the 70s and it failed. There's a couple things that slid through, but overall, and to their minds, anything that was, hit by the punk stick, that was just verboten to them. And then all of a sudden Nirvana breaks, and breaks in a way that they, like I said, they didn't know whether shit or go blind. They didn't know what hit them, and they didn't understand it. So then they were just scrambling and going for, I mean, some of the stuff that got signed then was insane. It was ridiculous. The money they were throwing around, because it was a bunch of old boomers, and they're looking at this wackadoo, but what, Butthole Surfers? Who the fuck names their band Butthole Surfers? They it was like a definite generation gap that they had built no bridges to. They had burnt what bridges were starting to be built. So that was I watched that shit gleefully. Like when they would sign, and I'm not going to badmouth anyone in particular, but sign some band who had 0.0 commercial potential ever. I mean, a fucking rock could see that.
yeah.
And some dipshit at Warner Brothers is like, I got him for $2.6 million. You're like, Jesus Christ, dude. Okay. Great for you guys. So I don't know. That was there was a lot of Schadenfreude to be had there, and also a lot of I told you so. Like, because I had lived, loving that type of stuff, and the few bands that tried to go that route, they didn't, prior to the '90s, and they didn't really, like Husker Du signed to a major label, and they didn't know what the fuck to do with that. It had all the potential. I mean, fuck, that was the blueprint for Nirvana, but those guys couldn't connect those dots. They didn't know that. They just threw everything at the wall, and some shit stuck, I guess.
I mean, was it personally vindicating for you? Because you signed a lot of these bands, and I'm not sure what the reaction to something like Helmet would have been in 1989. But within 5-6 years, every band on a major label or even an indie label is doing Helmet riffs. Do you know what I mean? Like by the end
Yeah.
of the decade, like that sound had basically taken over the heavy music scene.
I guess I didn't really think of it in those terms. I was kind of off and running, like I said before, in kind of different directions, and not really doing the smart play, which would be, whoa, that worked? Do it again. Did it work again? Do it 3 times. That's just not how my brain works, or how I function. So it wasn't really an option for me. But and also I didn't really feel vindicated. I mean, also at that time too, you get into your own bubble where I didn't give a fuck about the outside world. We'd kind of created this the alternative landscape so we could all survive there and not have to deal with the bullshit, baby boomer radio, baby boomer major labels, baby boomer major, Rolling Stone, all that garbage. We'd created a whole other world, so we didn't fucking need them. The whole other world of zines and labels and clubs and touring networks and shit. So I guess I wasn't looking for vindication. I was happy to be off in this, la la land that a lot of us had rolled up our sleeves and kind of put together.
Yeah. Uh, was your deal with the bands per album? Like, did you sign them for one album at a time?
No, it was usually, well, speaking of the outside world, and I would tell bands this back in the time, it's like, it would be, 4 or 5 album contract. It generally took any band, even underground band, 2 or 3 albums to get established enough to have break even albums. But I always told the bands the reason contracts existed, and our contracts were generally 2-page contract. The only reason they existed was because of the dipshit major labels, that if something starts to happen, they show up. And I'll be, always straight shooting with the band, but I told them it's like the second these cocksuckers show up, I'm not playing nice with them. I'm not rolling over and giving them 4 or 5 years of our work,
Right.
The foundation we built, so that they can just jump in. It's like we're the contract is here. And I told bands too, it's like, if you don't you want to move on or do something different, tell me, we'll tear up the contract. And I did that several times, where a band said, we don't want to do this anymore. And I'm like, hey, that was my my handshake on the side was, I'll tear it up. The only reason I have this is to protect, the label from the majors, that we're not their farm team,
Right.
And if we are going to be their farm team, we're going to get compensated for it. And that was the whole, legal end of it. There wasn't a lot there. Like I said, the 2 pages was strictly written to protect the label from the majors, so that we couldn't just get raided. They'd come in, and there was we were talking about, there was a period of time where they were coming in trying to raid everything. And then they learned it was like, it's not going to be easy. We're not pushovers, but that was kind of the mechanics, the legal mechanics behind it, and to this day, it's like, I still only work with people on generally, a handshake, which was, like I said, it was then too. We did have a contract though. And like I said, the contract was only for one purpose, I take that back, 2 purposes. One, to clearly delineate what's going to get paid, because that has to be written down. You can say a lot of things like, well, it's a profit share. Well, what the fuck is profit if you don't delineate it, define it? It's, there's a lot of profit goes away.
Yeah.
Or can get written off real quick. So it's just like, no, we'll give you this much a record sold, and this much a CD sold, this much a cassette. Everything we sell, you get this much from day one. Just so they know, what I mean? So there's no questions about it. And it's because that's where trouble comes up later on anyhow. I thought you said, you're at a bar figuring this shit out. Didn't you say that kind of shit?
Yeah.
It's like, fuck, I did not. I would never say, that kind of crap. And that's where it always goes awry. But yeah, like I said, there was a couple bands that said, came to me and said, we want to go try this elsewhere, do something different. And I was like, good luck, have at it.